Hello and welcome back to Sink or Swim, literally the only podcast on the internet where two straight cis men talk about movies and TV shows. I'm being pedantic, we talk about music too. I'm Prentice, and with me is my good mate Jules. How you doing?
Hello there.
Yeah, you alright?
Yeah, I'm fine. I was marvelling at the new improved Type 2 you were doing at the beginning.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. That threw me off guard a little bit. I nearly came in early because I was like, you throw it to me. Because you're like...
Well, I just wanted to make it clear what sort of, what kind of, corner of the market we'd managed to corner, But yeah, anyway, so how you doing, man?
Well, I'm one of those days. Half my notes for my topic have disappeared, so that's going to be fun later. But yeah, it's a film that I'm really confident with, so it should be fine. I'm excited to get the second episode of this done.
Yeah. So if you listen to the first episode, we did do a news segment at the start. We've decided to nix that just because of the way we record and the way the news cycle works and stuff like that. But we're just going to have a little bit of a chat really about things that pop into our head. The first thing...
I also, before we start, as you recap in last week, I want to give a shout out to everyone, the dozens of people who have been, or the dozen rather, who listened and were supportive and very supportive. We do appreciate that. This episode's going to be very different, I feel, just because of the films we've chosen are very different. We wanted to show that we're not just Marvel fanboys. So, as Prentice was saying, we're not going to do strict news, as in these are the details of the new project coming up. Because by the time we release this, you'll know way before you listen to this. But I think two things are kind of big for me at the moment. Well, they're not big for me, but Atlanta has started filming season 3 and 4.
Very exciting.
Very exciting because it's both of ours. Basically, it's my favourite television show of all time, and it's one of Prentice's up there.
My second. It's
Prentice's second, yeah. But what is really funny about it, not only that it's great that it's coming back, but they are filming in Stoke Newington. And Prentice alerted me to this earlier, he found something online about it. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about Donald Glover, Lakeith Stanfield, Daisy Beats, and Brian Tyree Henry, and all, I guess probably some cool cameos or whatever, and the director, all just chilling in Stoke Newington. It's just I just feels like two worlds that should never come together.
Yeah.
I think Stoke Newington's not exactly like Didsbury, but it's still it's still kind of very...
It's not the village of Midsummer.
Yeah. Oh, National Atlanta Midsummer Murders crossover. That would be so
Midsummer
good.
motherfucking Murders!
Oh yeah, literally, the family have kind of done that, haven't they, to be fair. But yeah, that was I can't stop thinking about that. It's just because if you slight spoilers for Atlanta. I'm not really, but the third series is going to be set in. I didn't realize it's going to be in England, so that's going to, if there's an episode set in England, that's going to be really cool. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, same.
What their world interprets England as.
Yeah. Well, I perversely, because we know that Atlanta often strays into absurdism and stuff like that. But I feel like Atlanta probably has the potential to portray one of the most realistic looks of the UK out of any American show. I feel like Atlanta is not going to go for the hacky kind of, tea and crumpets with the Queen kind of shit. They're probably going to portray a much more, accurate view of the UK than we've probably seen in most American stuff. So, it's kind of, that's what I'm expecting. There'll be the kind of typical Atlanta absurdism thrown in, but it won't be the kind of hacky shit.
Well, yeah, I think it'll be. I think at one hand, a bit like Atlanta when it does, that city. It's on the one hand, it's very, very people from Atlanta said it is really accurate to the experience of living there. Mm. But on the other hand, it also takes elements of that and flips it to make it absurdist. I'm looking forward to A, the realistic side, and B, what they do when they want to do the surrealist Twin Peaksy elements of it.
Yeah.
What parts of British culture they kind of, or English culture, they choose to make weird.
Yeah.
Because it's quite easy. You just have to go down any street. Obviously it's COVID, but out of COVID, you just have to go down any major city and past 12 o'clock, and it's an absolute graveyard of lunacy. It's just people staggering and people just come up to you and say the weirdest shit.
We're probably going to get some interesting commentary on the difference between kind of racism in America and racism in the UK. I'm hoping so anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if Donald...
Or maybe just throughout Europe.
Well, one thing, a little recommendation quickly is if you haven't already, he did a great interview for GQ with... Well, he interviewed Michaela Cole for GQ for her series May I Destroy You, and they do talk. I think touch on it a little bit about the difference in racism and like how that manifests itself and stuff, and also how that manifests in the TV industry and film industry.
Yeah.
So it's something he's thought about, but I think it'd be interesting to know to what extent he's actually thought about it. I don't think it's something Americans are very self-centered in a way, not like in a traditional sense, but they just kind of, their worldview is America and everything else. So I don't know. I think Donald is one of those Americans who does have a wider worldview. But I'd be interested to know how much he's engaged with like the realities of British racism and the ways that it manifests itself in our industries. Yeah, and the other big, this isn't going to be news by the time it comes out because it's been in the news cycle for about 3 years. But the Snyder League Justice Cut is out. So I mean, it's been actually well received, to be honest, which surprised me a little bit. I had a sort of pettiness that I wanted it to be shit just because I was like. It's the ultimate to me. It's the ultimate epitome of like, I'll remake culture. And we're not even remaking different things now. We're just remaking the same things again until it's liked.
Yeah,
it's kind of like I don't have the problem with
like 5 years apart as well.
Yeah, like I don't have some of the problems that other people have with it, like that it's pandering to like toxic areas of the internet. My problem with it is like from a slightly snobby creative angle. We don't want to slip into this trap of like. Art isn't allowed to stand on its own and to fail. Yeah. It needs like things don't have to be good just because you want them to be good. Like you can be disappointed by things, and like if we get around the path of if enough people don't like something, we remake it. It kind of takes away that creative that the idea of the creative giving something. Because you made a good point about like supply and demand for companies taking what people have been demanding and making it. Because it's going to make them money and it's going to be popular. Yeah. But there's also a point of like I don't know. I feel that's a road that I don't really want to go down personally. Like in terms of people, if we're just doing that every time there's a little bit about like a little sort of enough of a fan base, like I don't like that. The kind of that's tough, isn't it?
I don't think that will be the case. I think this is a special situation because of the way that what surrounded the making of the film, let alone just like the negative reactions to it as well. You know what I mean? Like the fact that Snyder was making this film and there was these kind of drips and drabs from him about what was going to be in it and stuff. And then obviously he had a horrible family tragedy with his daughter and everything and had to sort of stop making the film. And then Joss Whedon came on and then loads of drips and drabs came out from the cast about like kind of the differences between Whedon and Snyder's directorial style, and we had like Ray Fisher come out with his public beef against Joss Whedon and stuff like that. I think all of this stuff sort of coalesced into a like people wanting to see their favourite characters done right, and they didn't feel that the Whedon cut did that.
I also had actually on the Snyder League Justice Cut, there were some interesting things that came out specifically to more on brand with this podcast. It's a mystery thing. Tom Holkenberg, who is Junkie XL, he was originally down to do the music for when Zack Snyder was still helming the original Justice League, and then because again, Joss Whedon fired him basically, and got Danny Elfman on board to do the score that like was released with the film, and then Zack Snyder's got Junkie XL back on to do the score again, which is interesting. I think it's quite interesting. Like, very, very different from what I know from Junkie XL. It's very different. Like to have Danny Elfman and Junkie XL soundtracking scoring the same film seems quite interesting to me. It streaks of a very different tone, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Obviously, I'm stereotyping their work, obviously. But...
Yeah. I mean, he's done stuff. I think him and Danny Elfman also worked on the original Justice League. I could be wrong, but I swear he has a track on the original Justice League. Okay. Film, and also he has worked on other things alongside more traditional composers as well, like Deadpool and stuff. Okay. So I don't think this is the first time. I think he was on Batman v Superman. I think Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer both did stuff for Batman v Superman. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's quite the first time, but yeah, it is. It's definitely an interesting mix of styles, definitely.
And there's no crossover. I mean, I read an article that was basically like, there was no crossover here between like what was in the original. Like, I looked at the track listings, different track listings, everything's different. Yeah. Different pieces of sync being used, everything. Like, again, as a kind of film, it's almost a different film. It's not a cut. Like that's the thing. It's not cut.
No, it's not.
It's called the Snyder Cut. But it's not cut. It's a different film. But you're using the same characters.
So this week I'm going to be doing Kill List. Nothing to say about that.
No, I'm waiting. I'm waiting with bated breath.
Yeah. So, I decided to do Kill List this week because Ben Wheatley, the director, has a film coming up this year on the 18th of June called In the Earth, which stars Joel Fry, Reece Shearsmith, and Hayley Squires, which is a pandemic-set horror film. Very.
I mean, I don't think you need the second word, really.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so just a bit of background on Ben Wheatley. He's one of my favourite directors, I would say. Definitely one of my favourite British directors.
He reminds me a little bit of like, I don't know him at all. I don't really know what his character's like, but for like the vibe I get of him, he's kind of like film version of Alan Moore. He's like, it gives me a lot of Alan Moore vibes.
Yeah, he kind of has that vibe. Yeah, they're both from Essex, both big bearded blokes from Essex.
Like their Wiccan stuff.
Yeah, they like their Wiccan sort of stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Ben Wheatley goes quite as hard into it. Like he doesn't live it in the way that Alan Moore does. But yeah, no, it's all right. Yeah, so Ben Wheatley, his previous work includes stuff like his first film Down Terrace, Kill List, as mentioned, which we're going to be doing. Sightseers, the sort of black comedy starring Alice Lowe and a few other sort of notable people. A Field in England, which is quite a big film of his. He's done episodes of Doctor Who, Ideal. He did the Johnny Vegas sitcom.
Yeah.
He's done some comedy stuff for Channel 4. Yeah, he's got quite a broad kind of range of work, Ben Wheatley. A lot of kind of satirical, quite dark and satirical for the most part. And he has a couple of muses who he works with a lot, like Neil Maskell, Michael Smiley, Alice Lowe. Like he's got a few people who crop up in a lot of his work. But yeah, he's one of my favourite directors. I think he's just got a really strong, really interesting filmography. They're always very dark and interesting ideas and very satirical and kind of, I don't know, yeah. But yeah, so we watched Kill List last night. What did you think?
Why should I start with it? I did enjoy it. The first thing probably is to attach a value judgment. And I did enjoy it. I'm big into like British indie films. Definitely at the moment. I love the aesthetic. I love the tone of them, how they're shot, everything about them is really kind of what I would call like a distant cut. It's distant but comforting. And that film, it's kind of I always called it. It's three.
You might be the first person to call Kill List comforting, but
I know, but like the style, like just the style of it, like
the aesthetic and stuff.
I don't know. I don't know whether it's like a weird parochial vein in me, but it's an intensely British film, and that always is quite comforting to me. You
can sort of see like every garage you've ever been to, every road you've ever driven on in that film, sort of thing. It's got those kind of very quintessentially kind of run down, kind of urban decay, kind of British aesthetic.
I think it's like basically 3/4 is a dark comedy, like buddy film.
I mean, would you call it a comedy?
Oh, it's quite funny.
It is very funny. It is very funny at moments, but I don't know if I'd call it a comedy film.
Yeah,
it's got very funny. It's got very funny dialogue in the way that two mates kind of cracking jokes and stuff, dirty jokes about their sex lives and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if it's a comedy film.
Yeah, maybe it's not. I didn't. Yeah, not straight up.
I mean, I would describe it as like a dark thriller that then takes a turn for horror. See, a psychological thriller that takes a turn for horror towards the end.
Yeah, interesting for me, like on a very personal level, I didn't find it that intense up until like the last maybe like 40 minutes. Like, okay. I actually found it quite a nice watch.
And by the way, 40 minutes, that's about halfway through the film. It's a very breezy watch. It's only an hour and a half, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's probably...
So you're saying you probably found the last half quite...
Yeah, so once it sort of moved into the horror element...
Sorry, I've just realised that's a delivery for me, I think. Sorry about that. I had a package delivery.
Sorry, you just we started our first recording, just went straight to the mic. Oh, that was so funny.
Yeah.
That was such good timing.
Getting a delivery mid-podcast completely threw me off. Did not even think about what I was doing.
Cracked me up so much. Yeah, anyway, it's actually quite cool. This is, although, if I'm going to throw one label on it, horror. Actually, no, I mean, you're right, actually, thriller, psychological thriller, but actually it has a loads of, like, it's almost, for me, it's got 3 distinct parts in it.
Which Ben Wheatley references in his like Film 4 interview.
Oh, does he?
That like ran before the film aired on Film 4 for the first time.
Yeah.
He references the idea that a lot of people have said it's like 3 films stitched together, but he views it more as like a symmetrical, like one whole kind of symmetrical piece.
Yeah. So I view it as like part kitchen sink drama, part maybe crime thriller, part horror film.
Yeah.
I found it once you sort of filled in the gaps. To me, it's one of those films where like a bit like Us that I'm going to talk about. Once you start dissecting it a little bit,
Spoilers.
Oh, for my earth-shattering piece later, yeah. It kind of makes more sense after the fact. I don't know.
Yeah. No, you may be right. So for anyone who basically hasn't seen Kill List, basically, Neil Maskell and Michael Smiley play Gao and Jay, who are 2 ex-soldiers who have basically come back to the UK. And Jay, played by Neil Maskell, basically has been out of work for about 8 months. There's a recession on it. It's kind of like that late 2000s, early 2010s kind of era in the UK. He hasn't worked in 8 months, presumably from PTSD. We sort of get hints at that. And a few other reasons as well. He's struggling to kind of reintegrate back into kind of normal life and stuff like that. And his wife, who's also an ex-soldier from the Swedish military... did I say ex-wife? I didn't say ex-wife, I meant wife. His wife is from the Swedish military and basically sort of pressures him into... Not really pressures, they need the money, and basically him and his mate Jay take up a job as hitmen. And so they take a contract from a mysterious man known as the Client, and basically leads them into like a kind of really dark and brutal journey across kind of the southeast of the UK, where they... encounter their kind of targets and sort of uncover more about the Client and kind of it plays into elements of Jay's past and Gao's kind of personal life and stuff like that and yeah, it sort of culminates in quite a horrific fashion. But yeah, so I guess the first thing to talk about in terms of the music, which is quite interesting, is that there's actually quite a lot that's close to home for us with this film. So I feel, I don't know for sure, but I feel like some of this film was shot in Brighton, if not all of it.
You mentioned that when we were watching.
Down Terrace was shot in Brighton. And Ben Wheatley lives in Brighton.
I mean, yeah.
And a lot of the areas that appear in the film look like kind of the outskirts of Brighton, where like you've got the more sort of desolate areas, like the kind of industrial parks and sort of the older houses and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and
could well be on something there.
So the composer, Jim Williams, was actually a course leader for music performance at the university we went to. In Brighton.
Oh, I think I might have some.
It got mentioned a few times.
Yeah, because they do like to self-promote. Yeah.
Yeah, but so he's done sessions work for people like Maxi Priest, M People, Terry Hall, Paul Weller.
Oh, nice.
And he's been part of prolific writing teams like The Matrix, who wrote songs for Katy Perry and Britney Spears, and he's been part of the writing team Swamp, who wrote hits for Natalie Imbruglia and Pixie Lott.
Oh.
He's scored TV shows such as Auf Wiedersehen Pet, Hotel Babylon, for which he was nominated for an Ivor Novello Award.
Stuff.
Lock, Stock, the TV show adaptation of the movie. Yeah. Minder. And he's also composed scores for films like Julia Ducournau's Raw, which was that kind of horror film from a few years ago that was quite controversial for its sort of graphic nature. I don't know if you remembered hearing much about it.
I don't think so.
Came out in about 2016. It's about a vegetarian girl who goes to like this kind of college, and veterinary college, and discovers that she has a taste for flesh, basically.
Oh, maybe.
And it was quite gory and grisly. Yeah. Apparently, at like one of the film festivals it premiered at, a few people fainted because of some of the scenes and stuff like that.
Is there a lot of cannibalism going on?
Yeah, apparently it's pretty grisly, and it achieved a level of controversy. But he was nominated for a Caesar Award, which is, I believe, I can't remember who's
Conquest or
well,
bad joke.
I can't remember. Anyway, the Caesar Awards quite big ones, and he was nominated for Best Original Music at the Caesar Awards for his work on Raw. He's done scores for Michael Pearce's Beast and Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor.
Okay, wow.
Son of Cronenberg, Brandon Cronenberg.
Oh, that needs to be a film, Son of Cronenberg.
But yeah, most relevant is his work on Ben Wheatley's first 4 films: Down Terrace, Kill List, Sightseers, and A Feel in England.
He's Ben Wheatley's guy.
Yeah, he's done the scores for all of those. So I was doing some reading on him, and he's dropped references in terms of his influence to the compositions on Hitchcock films, as well as composers like Morricone, Schifrin, Jerry Goldsmith, people like that. And what I thought was interesting about when he referenced Jerry Goldsmith is that the score for Kill List reminds me of the score for Alien, composed by Jerry Goldsmith.
Oh, well, that makes total sense then.
And yeah, so the score of Kill List reminds me of the score for Alien, and Terry Rawlings' work as the sound editor of Alien, in that kind of there's this intense drone underneath a lot of the music in both films. There's a lot of drone.
Yeah, that was my favourite favourite parts of the score was like it's very tense the whole way through. Like there's no let up but like that drone is almost like
it's quite an oppressive score.
Yeah, it doesn't let you escape. There's no
which I think is the same in Alien.
Yeah,
it's quite an oppressive and like non-stop kind of drone in the score. But what I think is interesting about that is I think the drone works in kind of it creates a sense of like space in within the film, but also like dread, and more specifically dread in mundanity. And I think if you look at Kill List as like a kind of British kitchen sink drama with a lot of normal life mundanity, and Alien as a film about a bunch of blue collar workers doing a mundane job, because that's what it is, they're space truckers effectively. And so I think that the scores work in a similar way to kind of create this sense of dread in the mundanity of what's happening to them, and the fact that horrible things can happen to normal people like us, the viewer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because that drone, it's oppressive mundanity, right? It's kind of it's the horror in that kind of, because also there's these kind of themes of in Kill List and Alien of kind of the way in which kind of corporate society or capitalist society kind of oppresses us in like horrific ways. So in Kill List, there's this whole thing of like basically the kind of pointlessness or meaninglessness that Jay finds in kind of our way of life. You know, like as opposed to like he doesn't see the point. He has no joy in life left anymore. Yeah. And in Alien, there's the ways in which kind of corporations will throw you under the bus in order for their own personal gain.
Yeah.
So they're willing to they deem the crew expendable as long as they can save the alien itself and study it.
Yeah.
And
he as a provider, there's a lot of the kitchen sink stuff comes from him not being able to be a traditional provider for the family, and you could say he was emasculated.
God's sake, no, you couldn't. I wondered why you were smiling for about 3 minutes there, and I was like, I'm not going to let you jump in. I'm going to finish my quite good point here before. God's sake,
because I
can't believe you had that little smile from that.
No, I could have gone twice because I was going to go, typical masculine tendencies to be the provider. Jesus. Sorry, carry on.
So I think there's a link there anyway, and so I felt quite vindicated when I saw that Williams had kind of dropped Jerry Goldsmith as a sort of reference on his work, and so yeah, I think the droning. I mean, I'm not 100% because I'm not a musicologist or an audiophile or anything like that, but the droning on the score for Kill List sounds a bit like what I think could be a hurdy-gurdy, which I think is like a kind of old school kind of folk instrument that also creates a drone in the sense like you create a drone by turning a crank, and then with your other hand you hit keys on the side that affects the drone. So it's basically the same principle as woodwind. Like you blow air through a thing, and then you change your fingering on the holes to change the pitch of the air being blown out. And so come on, be mature.
Sorry, I tried, but then you kept going. You're like fingering into the holes, and then you blow out the other end. I was like, oh, come on, you can't do that to me.
So basically I think that creates kind of a drone anyway, and then you affect the kind of pitch of the note with the keys. So I think it's an interesting score in that kind of, I would say there's elements of folk, I would say there's elements of avant-garde, and I would say there's slight elements of kind of traditional score, but I would say kind of avant-garde and kind of folk, and I would also say actually ambient kind of stuff as well. And so you can see, I would say like the kind of, the folk stuff is interesting. I mean, I'll get to that a bit later, but I'll start with like kind of I think it's quite a bit of avant-garde music in it in terms of like kind of when you think about there's a lot of kind of strings just continually plunging, but not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's not like a kind of build-up and then a afterwards or anything like that. It's all just kind of plunging to nothing. And then they'll come back in again and just plunge again. And then they'll come back in again a bit later and just plunge down again like that. And there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of like really intense kind of drum rolls that then lead into like just crashing the cymbals and hi-hats. But like, it's kind of at odd timings. There's a lot of just like the drums will just come in and just kind of stuff as the strings kind of.
I went straight to that some of that music. That's well done.
Yeah, and there's also elements, I think there's sounds being played backwards. I think there's some backwards drum stuff.
Oh,
when I
really?
was listening
That's
to it.
cool.
I think there's some kick drums and some toms maybe being played backwards, and I think there's a bell as well, like a
Yeah.
like a bell being struck, and then I think that is put backwards into the score, which obviously gives it that kind of
Oh, that's cool.
level of avant-gardeness.
Yeah. Also, it might be to do with Ben Wheatley saying, I think it's something you told me about, that it's a film that like it's mirrored, like there's some sort of
Yes,
inversion.
there's like a symmetricality in the kind of narrative.
So yeah, maybe it's something to do with like, I don't know, putting something backwards. Maybe if you can read
Yeah.
the film backwards or whatever.
Yeah. And if you play the score backwards, the parts that are backwards will be forwards, and the parts that are forwards will be backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially.
I don't know. It's just a little thing.
Yeah, no, there definitely. I think there could be an element of that, and then obviously, yes, you've got the kind of, I would say, the drone obviously is the large part of the kind of ambience kind of stuff. But what? Yeah, I mean, where we'll get to sort of the meat of the discussion about the score is in folk elements, and so I think the whistling is obviously something that is probably worth drawing attention to first.
That was so haunting. That's probably I reckon that's the most haunting part for me of the soundtrack was the whistling. It was so like, there's something really unsettling about a whistle.
Yeah,
It really comes through. I don't know
just
what
a lone whistle.
Yeah, it feels menacing, and I don't know why. Do you know what I mean? It just feels like something when someone's whistling, something's about to happen.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes any sense out of context.
I know what you mean. I definitely get what you mean. Yeah, it feels very intimate as well. The way that the whistle is like recorded, it feels very close to the mic. You can hear the kind of, and it's not a perfect whistle either. There's a lot of like, it's not someone who's like a brilliant whistler. It's a very normal whistle that kind of wavers, and there's. Yeah, and it when you listen to it, especially with headphones on, it feels like you're almost having someone whistle into your ear. Like it's an odd experience.
It's kind of sadistically whimsical because of like the setting that it's being like. This is not a film that needs like to have whistling in it. It's people like just being brutally hacked to death.
Yeah,
And you've got like someone whistling. It feels like sadistic.
yes, yeah. But yeah, so what I think is interesting is that there's a big kind of influence on this film and the kind of the imagery in it and stuff from like pagan culture and kind of like folk kind of elements of kind of a burgeoning genre that I just discovered recently called folk horror. Well, I say burgeoning genre, it was coined in sort of the 2000s, I think. And then Mark Gatiss drew attention to it in his history of horror from the early 2010s. But yeah, there's a real movement back towards folk horror, especially with a lot of A24 films, with stuff like The Witch, Midsummer, and then obviously a lot of Ben Wheatley's work, like A Field in England, Kill List, and there's a lot more that I could pull out, but I'm not going to waste time here. But yeah, so I think the pagan and folk influences on the score, I think, do tie into the themes of the film, especially in the sense of either the brutality and violence and the way that violence begets violence, and it's all a circle, and kind of if you can't sort of inflict it without kind of expecting to receive some back. And I feel like it could perhaps also be a factor of the kind of, it could tie into the kind of unknown factor of the cult and their plans because of the pre-Enlightenment connotations and like the lack of knowledge and clarity on things out of your remit in like an era where people would subscribe to paganism or whatever. That folk kind of influence and like the pagan music reminds us of that, and that ties into how we know nothing about the cult throughout the whole film.
That's a good take.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like the fact that we get the strange symbol by the cult right at the start of the film. It's literally the first opening of the film is the symbol, their symbol being scratched onto the screen.
Yeah.
And I think where it starts to get really interesting is when you look at the idea of like folk as the kind of antithesis of modern, or if you look at kind of folk music as the antithesis of like musical modernity.
Yeah.
It stands to reason we'd be fearful of it, like something else that should be kind of long dead, like zombies or vampires or whatever.
Yeah. That's a good point, yeah.
And especially again when we look at kind of stuff like paganism and kind of our folk traditions, I feel like there's a definite willing rejection of it in our modern society. And I think deep down it kind of reminds us of like where we've come from and kind of what we still are at our core in a lot of ways.
Well, there's that conflict between like Jay's kind of blue collar kind of post industrial revolution work hours, kind of that idea of his sort of like strained, like he's sort of shackled by modernity, and then there's that. It's then in contrast with like the freedom of paganism, and that it's a natural as paganism is kind of, or the pagan cult is the villain technically in this film, as paganism is modernity's natural enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a bit poncy, but
No, yeah, no. Definitely, I agree. And I think what's also interesting is when you look at folk horror, and in particular things like The Wicker Man, which Kill List directly references with the book that Jay carries around with him as they go from hotel to hotel doing their hits and stuff like that. And a lot of folk horror is about outsiderdom, especially The Wicker Man. Kind of the main character in that who goes to the island. He's very much an outsider because he's a Christian and they celebrate paganism. And so, yeah, I think a lot of folk horror is about that, but I think Kill List stands in contrast to most folk horror because it's actually about belonging. I think a lot of it ties into our fear of belonging to something more violent and primitive than what we think we are now. And there's a lot of allusions drawn to the ways in which kind of our modern society is actually more similar to our kind of what we think of as primitive or violent kind of pre-Enlightenment society than we would like to actually address consciously.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I think if you look at Kill List, it's about belonging to this Jay belongs to this violent primitive cult at the end. He gets crowned as their new presumable kind of leader, and he shows basically no reaction. He cuts off his last ties to normal kind of society in spoilers when he kills his wife and kid.
Yeah.
And he belongs to this cult. And I think a lot of folk horror is actually about succumbing and being victimized by something more violent and primitive because we are an outsider to it.
Oh, nice.
And so I think the folk music in the film's score, whilst it is a high art, is ultimately familiar to us in its use of kind of basic instruments and sounds like whistling, bells, strings, drums, and vocalizations as well. And it doesn't have much virtuosic kind of solos or flares. And I think in that way, because of that familiarity, it kind of incriminates us in it too. It reminds us of the world that Kill List is set in the world that we do inhabit. We are Gal, we're forced to partake in the modern world's sacrifices for the greater good, in the same way that the cult throughout the film sacrifice other people for the greater good as well. The greater good.
So good.
So yeah, I think the score kind of really works in tandem to the themes of that film it reminds us that actually a lot of stuff that goes on in the film, whilst horrific, is actually much closer to home than we would like to think, in the same ways that kind of pre-Enlightenment behaviours and kind of pagan behaviours are as well. We're so desperate in modern society to distance ourselves from ideas of kind of paganism and tribalism and stuff like that, but ultimately a lot of the behaviours that we look down on have basically just shifted form. And you can kind of see that in the film with Gal's girlfriend when they're at the dinner table and she talks about her job in human resources or whatever, and about how she is basically responsible for firing people. And she says she tells them that when they're all having their kind of menial chat over dinner, getting to know one another, Gal's girlfriend says, I work in human resources. I basically hire and fire people when there's extraneous manpower in departments or whatever. And she says, it's not personal. And Jay says to her, well, I'm sure they take it personally and their families do as well. And she's like, in the business world, everything's part of a grand plan. It's not, you can't look at it on an individual level. And I think that obviously that's the ruthlessness of the business world. But when you look at it, the pagan cult operates in a similar way. They are killing people in the service of their aims.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, what really is the difference?
Yeah.
Where we're supposed to be. We like to think we're more civilized, but people still get laid off every day and made redundant. People end up on the streets. People are killed unjustly.
Yeah.
So really, are we any different at all? Also interestingly about the score, this will probably be my last point about it. It's one continuous piece of 20-minute music, and that's it. I listened to it online,
okay.
And it's not a bunch of tracks. It's not track 1, track 2, track 3. It's one 20-minute track. And so basically the way it was used in the film is they didn't just take tracks and put them over scenes. They had to chop parts out of this 20-minute piece of music and put them, chop and cut them up and put them in the film when appropriate.
Okay.
And found some interesting stuff in that. I found an interview with Jim, the composer, talking about the merits of both kind of the ideas of improvisational and composition-based scores, and talking about how kind of the ideas of bar structure and time signatures work when you're editing a film and editing the music into the film. So he talks about the idea that if you use a 4/4 time signature with an 8-bar kind of, structure, like a classic pop song kind of thing, the score can be really truncated when it's cut in and out of the film because you haven't got that natural flow. You have to kind of cut to the rhythm. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
And so he talks about kind of how that can basically lead to it being very truncated. And so composers like Bernard Herrmann, for example, they steered clear of composed melodies for that reason in their scores. A lot of their stuff was improvised, basically. And Jim says he gets around it because he actually does subscribe more to compositional based stuff rather than improvised. But he says he gets around it by using time signatures that drift away from the obvious, like those used in traditional folk. A lot of time signatures used in that kind of music is not in like kind of your normal kind of 4/4 time signatures or whatever. And I think that explains how his 20-minute piece of music can be cut in and out of the film because it's in an editorially freeing time signature.
Oh, okay, yes.
And and the score is also symmetrical like the film's narrative. So the score begins and ends with the whistling.
Oh, that's cool.
And Wheatley has mentioned how the film was symmetrical because, you look at, the sword fight scene where Shell has her kid on her back at the start and they have a play fight with foam swords. And then at the end of the film, she has her kid on her back and is covered in a cloth and her and Jay have to fight and he kills his wife and kid unknowingly.
Yeah, there's one bit of sync as well in this, which is by Joan Armour Trading.
Yes, it is. It could have been better.
It could have been better by Joan Armour Trading. And that's interesting because she's also a folk artist, but also Joan Armour Trading is black. So she's an outsider to an outsider art form. Yeah.
So basically in conclusion, Kill List, if you've got the stomach for something sort of pretty grim and dark and horrible, it's really, really good. I would definitely recommend it and the rest of Ben Wheatley's work, with the exception of maybe his 2 episodes of Doctor Who, because they're pretty piss poor.
I like the Doctor Who episode where people are cleaving each other's heads in with hammers.
Yeah.
This week, my pick is Us, which is Jordan Peele's 2018 follow-up to his masterpiece, Get Out. Like, as you did, Prentice, earlier, you gave a quite a good overview of what your film was. Us, it's not really possible to do that because for me, I prefer it most like The Shining, in that like the film isn't about what happens at the end. It's what happens in the film. Like the bits, the like set pieces in the film are like what the film's about, rather than like, because the film isn't actually, would you agree the film isn't actually about concrete things, so it's hard to give an overview of what it is?
Yeah.
So it basically, as much of the premise that I can sort of give you without stretching into like my personal views of what I think happened, are that a black family played by Lupita Nyong'o, Winston Duke, I do not know the other 2 names, but they've got 2 kids.
Yeah.
And they go for a beach holiday and then end up being stalked by doppelgangers. But they're out to kill them.
I think that's basically all you need to give, pretty much, as a plot,
Yeah. Compared to Get Out, I would say it's a less strong film, but the score, I would say, is stronger.
Yes, I agree.
There's definitely more uses to think. So, like, in terms of...
Shall we quickly give a justification, as to why we're also doing Us? So there's a TV show called Them, dropping on the 9th of April on Amazon Prime, which in a lot of ways looks sort of thematically similar to Jordan Peele's other work. And I definitely think there's a deliberate kind of attempt to tie themselves in a bit to Us. Right. So again, Them features a predominantly black cast, and it's called Them. And it seems to be, we're unsure at the moment whether it's kind of an anthology thing or like a one kind of whole narrative thing about kind of a black family in the suburbs, right?
Yeah.
And it basically seems to be like again, kind of this, not again, it's not like it's, it's part of this burgeoning genre, like I'm sure you were about to mention. Sorry, I did kind of overwrite you, but I just wanted to make sure that the Them link was drawn. Early doors.
Yeah, I was going to go the other way around. Yeah, just say that like let's call it woke horror, like especially in like an African American context, like taking the African American experience and sort of interpolating it with like classic horror tropes and stuff. So yeah, that's coming out. So yeah, this film is very much like there's definitely direct influence from it. And the score is it's much more than Get Out. Music is intrinsic to this film, not just in like, oh, it really adds stuff. There's plot points that revolve around musical cues, which I didn't expect Jordan Peele to do, actually. It didn't strike me as that kind of director. But he, again, with your film, he uses the name house guy, Michael Abels, is the... I
think it might be Abels.
Is it Abels? He did Get Out. Again, I was vindicated on this, because it's like, this is very reminiscent of Get Out. There's certain things I'm like, if I didn't know, I would guess this was the same guy doing the score. So in the film, I would say the characteristic of this score, in terms of what makes it unique, is it's African. It's influence of African music.
Okay.
So there's a lot of like what is the best bit of score for me is there's a lot of use of African choir music. It's like there's kids and adults, but quite a high pitched choir singing stuff in, I reckon, an African dialect that I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But they use that continuously, and I'll come back to it later. But that's really haunting and really creepy. And there's stuff that happens at the beginning of Get Out. There's someone speaking, I think, Swahili or something at the beginning of Get Out. So there's that, and there's also a lot of African percussion on it. It's quite plucky. I think it sounds like a caliper.
Okay.
But I don't think it is. But that's my reference to it. It's kind of plucky. It's like someone sort of really horribly plucking a guitar string.
Okay.
But going back to Abels, he studied West African drumming at California Institute of Arts and sang in a predominantly black church choir.
Okay.
So that's why I was like, oh, yeah, that's clearly what's been trying to. It's not just me thinking, oh, he's a black composer, he's doing African stuff. He literally is doing African stuff.
Yeah.
The resume or CV is he's done a lot of he's not got a huge chunky CV, but it's all very kind of similar. It seems to be quite a lot of it is what I call black cinema. So See You Yesterday, he did.
Okay, nice, cool. I like that film.
Yeah, he did music for a film called All Day and a Night, which is a Netflix film written by one of the co-writers of Black Panther. And he also did some additional music for Detroit. Oh,
cool. Okay.
Yeah, so he's done quite a lot of stuff that's based around the African American experience.
That's a film we could do for this podcast. Detroit.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely. And Get Out, which is obviously the score overall is quite eerie. It's not a tense score. It's an eerie score.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's kind of campy.
Yes, it's quite camp.
I remember a lot of the score for us being quite camp in a great way. I love camp, and I love that is not a slight on anything in Us at all. I actually really enjoyed Us.
Yeah, but what I think is it takes an eeriness of, say, something like Kill List or another film that has quite an eerie but it adds in African elements, so it's very much feels like, whilst it's not just tackling race in this film, we're experiencing black people's horror. So if we sort of take a metaphor that the music in the film is kind of experienced by the characters on screen, I like that it's got African. I like that it's like eerie music from an African perspective.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point. Because you sort of touched on ideas of what themes, the difference of the themes of Us and Get Out, and like you say, Get Out is very much an intrinsically kind of Black American story, whereas Us obviously has elements of being that. But yeah, there's a lot of discussion, and continues to be a lot of discussion about what Us is really about. I think a lot of people tend to settle on the idea that it's actually kind of class-based, right? It's kind of a lot
stronger allegories of class, yeah.
Class and poverty and the kind of the forgotten people, who basically presumably the underclass, which the doppelganger characters in the film live in the underground. So it kind of works as an allegory for the underclass and the forgotten, the starving and the homeless and stuff like that in America. And so I'd assumed that what you were saying about kind of the African instrumentation and stuff like that on the score wasn't necessarily actually something that ties into the themes, but was a kind of deliberate kind of, was instead a deliberate kind of just rejection of the fact of kind of Western normative scores.
Yes.
So a lot of Western scores obviously in general use Western instrumentation, specifically kind of orchestras with string orchestras and kind of the traditional setups of those in the West. Yeah. And the score for this wasn't necessarily to tie into the themes or kind of because it's seen through the eyes of black characters, but more just that these are men who are clearly attuned to ideas of, like you say, wokeness and kind of redress and kind of the balances of these sorts of things in the industry. And so they've just said, let's just include this because why not? Why should we do a Western normative kind of thing in the way that kind of, why not include some kind of stuff from another? Because like you say, the kind of the allegory in this film isn't so much about race as it is about class, which again I don't think that negatively impacts the strength of the score. I still think the score's great.
Yeah, and what's quite interesting, there's a piece of music that is kind of the quintessential distilling of the elements I've talked about, which is called Anthem. It's the first track on the soundtrack, and that is like it's basically like the unofficial. It might be official. I didn't read enough into it. As I said, there's doppelgangers throughout the film, and they're referred to as the tethered. And they're kind of like sort of Frankenstein's monsters, for want of a better phrase, like versions of these characters. Like they're these.
I think Frankenstein's a great point of comparison.
Okay.
I was thinking that earlier when you were thinking of things to reference. Obviously, Get Out is a big one, and I would say Frankenstein is another one.
Yeah. So it's that piece of music and that African choir. It's very kind of. It's very kind of. It's quite quiet for most of the film. It just goes. And it's quite really it's like this eerie kind of creeping sense of like, oh, this is really odd. I don't like this. But then when they finally break into the house, it gets really loud. It's the loudest it's in the film.
Yeah.
And it's like it's kind of like heralding their arrival, and it's like it's kind of their unofficial motif because it's not called like the tethered. Like it's not called the tethered on the soundtrack, so it's not definitely a motif for them. But I think it kind of is because of how it's used.
Yeah, and
then there's also another point I really liked. It's a little bit of a reach from me, but it's talking of Get Out. In Get Out, Chris goes and wanders around his girlfriend's parents' house, and all through that there's weird little bits of harp.
Yes,
and like weird little sort of stings of like staccato violin that goes, and there's like a lot of that weird sort of stuff. And in this film, whenever like a black child goes wandering off on their own, that sort of very similar music plays.
Okay.
In this film, so I think I don't know. Given the backdrop of not to get going to get quite political here, on the backdrop of these films being made on the back of Armored Arbery, this is Armored Arbery was after, but Trayvon Martin and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the list is.
We don't need to go through the whole list.
Long.
Yeah, but specifically, Black Americans who were killed whilst on their own in a neighborhood they shouldn't be in. That idea of like that seemingly like innocuous thing on screen in a black gaze is kind of tension inducing. Like someone walking around the ground of a house, or quite an idyllic house, shouldn't be panic inducing, but it is from the black gaze. And in this, although this obviously isn't about race, I feel like the music kind of initiates that, you know, as a black person you should be very overly careful to not wander off on your own. So I am taking the reins a bit here, but
it's your bit.
Yeah.
Feel free to take the reins, mate.
And then what's the other thing that's really interesting? Yeah, this kind of crosses over between score, which is stuff made for the film, and sync, which is at the beginning of the film, the main character is called Adelaide, played by Lupita Nyong'o, and there's a kid. There's a flashback. It starts with a flashback of her as a child, and she's walking through this hall of mirrors, and she's whistling "Incy Wincy Spider."
Okay.
Very badly, I hasten to add, like a kid would. Like it's almost unrecognizable as "Incy Wincy Spider." And she's walking through this hall of mirrors, and then after a while she hears it back, and we're not sure whether that's echo or not. Watching it first time around, you think, oh, it's echoing. But then, as we'll see, her doppelganger has managed to find her way up into this hall of mirrors, so that she's also whistling the same tune back to her, because she's almost learning it. She's learning it through like how people do learn things. Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting that then fast forward to like when we first meet adult tethered Adelaide. She whistled her first thing is she's whistling that.
Okay.
Still quite badly. But I just thought it was really interesting, like that. I thought it had a point about it's kind of a childhood trauma thing. She's I'm going to spoil it now because it will help me. So we find out that actually it cuts away from when they meet each other. The two young girls meet each other, and it turns out that the tethered version throttles and drags the sort of above world Adelaide and swaps places with her. So when the sort of real Adelaide comes back, she's kind of she's whistling that as a kind of reminder to the doppelganger of like what she stole from her, like her childhood.
Right. Yeah.
It's like it's a reminder of like yeah, so I just thought it was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about the score for?
No, it's been a long time since I've seen Us, actually. Probably, since the last time we watched it together. So, I don't really remember it super well.
I think I have one more point before I go to some really interesting stuff about Sync.
Mm-hmm.
Because this has way more Sync than Get Out does. Get Out only has Redbone in it.
Yeah.
There's a really nice bit where the bit in the film wasn't nice, but when they're all kind of trying to escape from their doppelgangers, there's a lot of it's kind of inferred that the doppelgangers are slightly more strong.
Yes.
Are slightly stronger somehow. Although I'm not. That's kind of one of the slight faults of the film is that they're kind of inconsistent with that.
Yeah.
But
that's kind of in the tradition of a lot of horror, I would say, as well. Where like kind of if you look at them as like kind of the serial killer, like the kind of serial killers in the uniforms, like the jumpsuits that they're in, are seemingly invincible, super strong, everything until they're needed not to be.
Yeah.
Like Michael Myers in the Halloween films can smash through a door and survive being shot in the head. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of it's that level of that until it's convenient for them not to be.
Yeah.
So it could be a conscious decision because, as we know, Peele is an absolute scholar of horror. So
yeah. So there's like some really heavy like drums, and it gets quite like there's quite a lot of like interval. It's like heavy intervals, like to sound like real like sounds like heavy footsteps. The whole score kind of it's like sort of there's drums, and also the cellos also do it. It's just like it's sort of sharp, like sharp rhythmical bits of score to sound like the big characters, like the doubles of like Winston Duke's character, who's a big guy, and Tim Heidecker's character, who's also a big guy. Shows how like the threatening of them.
Okay.
And that brings there's something I'm really excited to talk about, because you mentioned this to me a couple of days ago, and I had to bite my tongue because it's
I think I've picked up on it now. Since then.
Right.
So this is presumably, I'm going to put my guess forward and tell me if I'm correct.
Yeah.
The creepy start from the start of I've Got Five on It, the song.
Yeah.
They've incorporated that into the score, right?
Yeah.
That kind of dun 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 kind of thing, the piano kind of thing, is part of the score of the movie, right?
Yeah. So I would say the featured song in this film is "I've Got Five on It" by Lunas, sort of Cypress Hill-esque 90s kind of old hip hop band. And yeah, their song plays multiple times in the film, and in the trailer for this film, they had they used it, and they interplayed it with Michael Abels' kind of scratchy violin and like the textbook post Inception dirge.
Yeah, the
dun
dun. Yeah,
but it makes it incredible. Oh yeah, that's ruined the sound wave.
Levels is absolutely crazy there.
Yeah, so like, but what happens is that it was so popular. I read it, so it was so popular in the trailer that they incorporated it into the film. So
I mean, it is really good.
Yeah, so I think I'll talk about the original first, and I'll talk about the tethered version, which that's what it's called on the soundtrack. It's called the tethered version, which is really cool.
Cool.
Yeah, tethered mix actually, I think it's called.
Oh.
So the original film, yeah, it comes on in the car when Adelaide and her family are on the way to the beach, and it's notable for two reasons personally. Is that one, Adelaide tries to get her son to like click in time to the music, and she's offbeat when she's teaching him to click, which kind of
it's like a hint to her being the tethered version.
Yeah, it's the hint to her not being like. Yeah, it's something not being quite right, but you don't pick. It's not obvious, but once you pick up on it, yeah, she's out of sync, which is interesting.
Yeah. And
also another little. This is a speculative point, a little bit, but the song is about splitting two things. It's like I think the whole idea is about drugs. The song's about drugs, and it's like it's like I think it's about how you split like the dope or whatever once you get from like whatever, and it's just that I read it's something to do with splitting between two, which is obviously. In the film, it's revealed that two bodies are sharing one soul, kind of thing.
Right, yeah.
So I thought that, I don't know, this is a very opaque reference, like tenuous thing.
So if it's like you get a 10 bag and each body gets 5.
Yeah,
each
yeah, I got 5. Yeah, that's the whole idea.
Yeah.
So I thought that might be a little Easter egg kind of for John Taylor to do.
Probably.
Yeah, and then the tethered version, I came up with it. I'm really proud at this point. um, is that it plays during like the final confrontation between Adelaide and the tethered Adelaide and the original, who's known as Red. The original is known as Red.
Yeah.
And like there's two bits of the score which I think kind of encapsulate something quite poetic in that there's some really nice sort of abrupt sort of violin strokes that go, which is quite elegant, and then there's like the dirge underneath, and whenever Red Adelaide moves in the fight, it seems to be with the nice violin.
Okay.
And the dirges kind of soundtrack when we watch
the main Adelaide, who is the original tethered Adelaide.
Yeah. We see her go from like, we think that the Red Adelaide is like the savage in inverted commas, or the primitive, and she's the evolved. But we watch as that flips and everything.
Yes.
And so every time it does that dirgy rumble, she becomes more and more manic.
Yeah.
In her actions and her movements, and becomes increasingly like sort of animalistic. It's really impactful.
It is, yeah. She's quite scary in that fight at the end when the Adelaide, who is originally the tethered Adelaide, kills the original Adelaide, who is now the one who seems to be tethered.
Yeah.
When she kills her at the end, she kind of grunts, doesn't she?
She grunts.
She like almost roars, basically. She like kind of like cuts her throat or something.
She breaks her neck.
Breaks her neck, yeah.
She impales her with a poker, and then she's still kind of bleeding and then out, and she just sort of cracks her neck.
Yeah, and then she's like, or something like that. She kind of grunts or like almost like roars after she does it.
Also thought of another great Easter egg. Just literally thought of it. The idea that, I don't know if you remember, she's handcuffed from basically halfway through the film.
Oh yeah.
And so in that fight, she's tethered. She's literally tethered.
Right.
Her arms are literally tethered.
Right.
I just thought of that.
Yeah.
Oh, again, another bit. Only on second watch that I realised. It makes an already brilliant bit of score, like sync, even better. So the film ends with a very dramatic like panning over like the hills of America, and like there's like the hands across America, like these all the tethered have risen up and are like weirdly trying to do like this hands across America thing.
Yeah, which is a reference to the old Hands Across America campaign, right? The old it's like an old campaign that they actually did in America to try and end poverty, right? It was like a charity-driven thing, but it was a huge failure.
Yeah, it was a huge failure. Yeah, it kind of...
They ended up losing more money than they got in donations or whatever.
Yeah, most of it went on, like, just paying for the stunt.
Yes, yeah. Which is a bunch of people all holding hands for miles and miles and miles.
Yeah, and it's a really impactful way because it plays Le Fleurs by Minnie Riperton.
Yes, yeah.
And it's quite dramatic stuff on that sort of big sort of string, like soul with strings underneath. It's really nice and sweeping. It's quite dramatic. But actually, you think, oh, well, it's just a cool little bit of sync that either the music supervisor or Jordan Peele's overseeing. But actually, in the advert at the beginning, you hear that there's an advert for Hands Across America, and there's a digitized version of Le Fleurs by Minnie Riperton on the advert.
Nice.
So it's a callback to like the first thing that Adelaide has seen. The whole idea is that the reason she's doing that is because it's the last thing she kind of remembers before she was taken.
Right. Okay.
And so that music plays. It's like a good like reflection of that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'd never picked up on that.
It's really hard to... I don't know how I picked up on it second time round, but I guess because I've seen it before quite recently. So.
Yeah.
Also, cool bit of trivia. Minnie Riperton is Maya Rudolph's mum.
Oh my god! Wow.
Yeah. She married Richard Rudolph and gave birth to Maya.
That's really cool.
The SNL comedian.
Yeah.
Sketch comedy. Yeah, which is mad. Yeah.
Nice.
And then there's I think there's quite a lot. There's quite a little hefty soundtrack. So the two bits I really want to get in above anything else is there's two tracks played very similar, like close to each other, which I like. So Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys is played, and like I really like it because obviously the Beach Boys are from California and it's set in California.
Yeah. So
that's a nice thing, and also Tim Heidecker's character plays like he's basically white Winston Duke. He's like the white, slightly more affluent version of what Winston Duke wants to be, and it's throughout that film. Gabe, who is his character, really wants to be Josh, who's that character. He wants the car like his, he wants the house like his.
Yeah.
But he's kind of like quite slovenly. Josh is quite slovenly, and he's like really lazy, and he just wants to have like a real just holiday. He doesn't want to do anything. He's literally just sitting there like a lump with some whiskey. and like his wife's trying to get him to like check because she thinks she hears something outside, and he just won't do it. And he says, Ophelia, play Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys, and like the Good Vibrations play. But what I find quite funny is like it's almost aggressive. It's like almost postmodern aggressive relaxation. It's like I'm by the sea, I'm by like the sun, like I'm gonna listen to Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys.
Yeah, to give me good vibes.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm not. This is like the ultimate. Yeah, you can't sort of like harsh my buzz if I'm like, I find that quite interesting.
And also I think there's an element of, because the Beach Boys kind of symbolically, they very much represent the kind of affluent white teens of the 60s.
Yes.
Like that's what they were, and that's who a lot of people who were listening to them were. And so to have their songs soundtrack this kind of scene where we see this very comfortable, very affluent white family in their huge house.
Yes.
And then they proceed to be sort of killed off. It kind of draws those, links between like, I don't know, you kind of compromise something in a certain way when you become that level of kind of affluent and comfortable. Which is consumerist. Which
kind of plays into the ideas of like, what have other people got to have gone through for you to be able to be in that position?
Yeah.
Which is
the tethered come and take, basically. Yes, they represent the underclass, it's them coming up to take some of the resources from the affluent who have taken it away from them. Yeah.
Which brings me on to nicely actually, thank you, to like, at that point, the whole point is there is rustling because like, they're tethered. Their Timecodes comes in and just brutally murders all of them, just like with scissors, and just like completely obliterates them. And what I think when I rewatched it, I was like, oh my god, if Jordan Peele, the music supervisor, has done this, the reason I think they've done, they are fucking geniuses. So as played off for laughs, Elizabeth Moss's character who plays Dahlia, who's like the mum, says
Josh's
wife, Ophelia, call the police. And then Ophelia goes, playing Fuck the Police by NWA. And then basically, so that plays, and it's brilliant for so many reasons. One, it's just funny. It's funny as fuck.
It is funny.
To watch like a family of I don't want to sound like a Panther.
Wow.
Watch this like that came out so wrong. To watch this sort of comfortable white middle class family just get absolutely taken apart to like NWA or Fuck the Police, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Like, and the whole idea is like on multiple levels. This actually works in such a brilliant way. Yeah. So the whole idea is
Don't worry, everyone. The berets come back off. He's put the AK down. The berets come back off. Made an appearance for a second.
Sorry, the letters that we had were going to fan base. We need a bit of controversy to basically the whole idea is like they're like five. Like, if we're taking this not as a black thing, like they're all like NWO pretty poor, so they're like, we're coming to get a pager and money and all that, and you're not going to stop us, and we're gonna like, there's going to be blood. They literally say that there's going to be bloodshed and stuff.
Yeah.
So like that whole idea is like literal in the lyrics, of like the underclass coming up to take it. Also, like the idea of like both of these bands are from California.
Yes, so it represents the disparate ends of the kind of poverty in California, one of the richest states in America, and yet it also has massive levels of homelessness.
Yeah.
Some of the worst levels of homelessness in the entirety of America. I think a lot of homeless people are actually shipped into California from other states because of the weather. They can be outside more with less risk to their health because it rains less and it doesn't get as dangerously cold. Yeah. So a lot of homeless people from other states actually get bussed to California, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So it's like, it's, I was going to say, so it plays as pretty much as soon as the black family come in to help. So it's quite interesting, and like, it shows like here's another point while I try and remember the other point, in that there's a whole thing about the police being quite inept in this film, because they phone the police when the Adelaide's family call the police when the Tether first show up, and yet they just never appear. And there's a whole thing in America about how like black people, although harassed by the police, also when they put in 911 calls, they've statistically had to wait way longer than white families do.
Yeah.
So that's also fuck the police in a very literal way of like, the police never help us.
Yeah.
So literally fuck the police. To a white gaze, SoCal is like lovely in hot rods and like girls and like good times and stuff. And like, but to a black family, it's like, well, not to a black family, to black people, it represents Compton and Oakland and like police brutality and like, but it just shows that disparate. Although it's not, you know, again, it doesn't.
The LA riots,
LA riots, yeah. So like, it shows like the duality in America. I guess going into that theme where one, in the same place, like two people can have such a vast, different experience of the same place.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the whole thing about the film. That like the tethered and like, I don't know. I mean, in one of the law dumps, they talk about how there's an inversion of like whenever the people on the surface have something good happen to them, something awful happens to the people on the bottom, and it's almost like, in that sense you can do that in a race way. Like for you know, like whilst all those great things are happening for what the Beach Boys are talking about, black people are experiencing what NWA are talking about.
Yes.
I don't know if I've got too much more to say. Yeah, so I think if you haven't seen Us, which hopefully, I mean you probably, hopefully you have. But yeah, I think the score is excellent in terms of its use of music for storytelling purposes.
Yeah.
And I think again that's why I think the film doesn't work as a whole narrative. I think it works in little set pieces throughout.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I think then also help with the music as well. Because it's quite discordant and eerie. It's got quite a disparate mix, like the synth that's used is quite disparate, which I think helps to like some of the disparate themes as well. Yeah.
Stylistically, Us is awesome. Yeah. Whilst it may not kind of bring what Get Out brought to the table, it's still a great watch, even though it's not of the same level of quality as Get Out overall. Stylistically, it's really cool. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to what Jordan Peele does next, regardless of like, you know, some people view Us as relatively a flop compared to Get Out in terms of the success of its kind of messages and themes and stuff. Yeah. And then obviously there's been quite a mixed reaction to his reboot of The Twilight Zone as well and stuff. But, you know, regardless of that, the ideas and themes that he tries to get across and the people that he brings with him, like his in-house composer to work on things and stuff like that, all of those kind of elements, you know, if he can turn out something like Get Out, hopefully we'll get more stuff that's of that level of quality. I'm sure he's still got plenty of great stuff with really interesting themes left in him. So. You've been listening to Sink or Swim, a podcast by Prentice Mitchell and Jules Pistano. If you want more from the pod, you can find us at Sink or Swim Pod, all one word, on Instagram and YouTube, and you can find us at Sink or Swim on Facebook.
To get in touch, please send us an email at syncorswimpod@gmail.com. You can listen to this pod wherever you find your podcasts, with full episodes and clips going up on YouTube as well.